Welcome to Mommy's on a Call, your sacred space to laugh, learn, and feel like a real grown-up human for a hot minute. I'm Stephanie Uchima Carney, a mom of 3 under 6, serial entrepreneur, business strategist, and donut connoisseur, just trying to get through the day one cold cup of coffee at a time. I believe that with more intention, a positive mindset, and self-care, it is possible to thrive in motherhood, business, and life. My mission is to uncover the daily rituals, life lessons, real-life tactics, and favorite tools to inspire and empower you, mommy, to get the most out of life every single unpredictable day. So grab your headphones, tell your kids you're on the potty, and tune in weekly for some laughs, knowledge bombs, and plenty of real talk with real moms, and maybe a dad or two. Welcome to the Mommy Pod. Hello and welcome back to Mommy's on a Call. Today, I'm excited to bring to you Julia Dennison. Julia is the digital content director for the Parents brand, which includes heading up the contents for parents.com and its social platforms. As a single co-parenting mama to a 4-year-old, Julia has been writing and editing in the parenting space for over 13 years with a passion for covering all the wonderfully unique ways people parent and form families. She was the co-host of the podcast Pregnancy Confidential, and now she's the co-host of a new podcast, We Are Family with Shaun T, and it's all about the diversity of family life in America today. So welcome, Julia.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This is such a pleasure.
I'm excited to have you here. So to start, what is your biggest mom win of the week?
Oh gosh, my win of the week.
And it could be a personal win. It could be whatever you want.
Do you know what? So I host a Clubhouse room on Fridays that's called No Such Thing as Weekends for Moms, basically, where we talk about our wins and our kind of like our happies and crappies for the week, as we like to call it. And it's so funny because it's like the crappies can really stack up, but like trying to remember the wins is always a little bit of a challenge. I think it was managing to coordinate. This is such a small one, but hey, I'll take it. It was pouring rain and hailstones yesterday in New York, where I live in Queens. And I managed to coordinate with my daughter's dad. So as you said, we co-parent, and he lives not too far away from me, but we managed to coordinate so that I could pick her up from school, and he did a handover with the rubber boots so that she was wearing velvet, really beautiful Janie and Jack velvet shoes to school that morning, but we managed to do a handoff so that I was able to get her in her rubber boots during the rainstorm, and she didn't ruin her lovely little velvet Mary Jane. So I think that's a win. I'm sure there are probably more substantial wins. Like, I mean, every day is a little win if I can get her to bed on time, fairly on time. And I think I did that yesterday. So maybe that's another win, but yeah, I got to take those small wins these days, I feel like.
Definitely. And I feel like just the little wins boost that positivity and just in everything that's going on. If we focus on, I love how you said the crappies, like it just doesn't make you feel good. So I love to start every episode with like asking for you to celebrate your win. Well, on that note, give us a little background about your family structure. I know that you co-parent and you're a single parent, but paint a little picture about what your family situation looks like and also kind of your family work situation, that schedule.
Oh, yes. So yeah, we have kind of a blended family co-parenting situation. So I'm a single mom. Let's see. I got divorced it was officially divorced when my daughter was 2, but we separated when my daughter was 1, and my daughter's now almost 5. She'll be 5 in June. And I get along really as well as anyone could with her dad. And he lives we're friends, actually. We're pretty good friends too. So I'm a huge advocate of trying to do that wherever possible when you're trying to co-parent with in divorce, is really just to try and do what's best for the kid, but also just, it doesn't have to be a big fight all the time. I think like you can have amicable co-parenting situations, and that's something I try and model. And it's really important to us. I think working in the parenting space and working on parents.com, I've seen so many studies to show how important it is that kids have equal access to mom and dad. So we really do split the time in half between the two of us, and he's only a few blocks away, so it's a short walk. And so that means that, what I have as it's pretty much just me. But it also means that I have time to myself, which I think is really important for all parents. And that's something that I would say, married or not married, I think taking that time to yourself at least I think it makes me a better mom. And yeah. And so my daughter lives part of the time with her dad and her dad's girlfriend. They just had a new baby. So she's got a little sister with them at that house. And then my house is just me and her, really. And yeah, it's just been, in terms of trying to make it work during the, working and during the pandemic, from like March until June, soon I had no help, and my parents live only a half an hour away, but as a lot of people, I wasn't seeing them because of the pandemic. And it was like, just really, it's such a blur. I can't even remember how I did it all, working and watching her at the same time. I think I've like blocked it out.
And, running a giant content company.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, at least try and do my job, which I think everybody was in that same boat. But yeah, thank goodness my daughter's now back in school in person, which has just been such a game changer for me. And now we're doing the kindergarten registration process. And my number one question is like, between like public schools and charter schools, I'm like, okay, I like the idea of a charter school, but please be open in the fall. Like, don't Zoom me. Don't Zoom at me.
I know. That's actually what kind of sealed the deal on our decision for kindergarten last year was we found out we got into a private school right when quarantine hit. And we were like, do we think we're going to go back in the fall? Like, which decision do we choose? And so I think we chose, I'm happy about our choice. I mean, it was a privilege and a financial craziness, but he got to be in-person kindergarten. So I thought that was amazing.
Oh my gosh. It's crazy how priorities have all shifted during the pandemic. It's like, just like the bare minimum, like let our kids be in school, please.
It's really like you're on like Maslow's hierarchy of needs right now. It's like, okay, so we need to prioritize like eating, like, being under one household. Like, how do you do under one roof? How do you do that all? Yes. There are a few points I want to go back to in your little blurb there. The first is talking about maybe co-parenting. You said like, there are a lot of studies on like amicable co-parenting. And I know coming out of the pandemic, there have been a lot of, unfortunately, divorces, separations, things that have come into light. How did you get on the same page with now your co-parent on how to do that? A lot of divorces look ugly. A lot of parents in general, even when you are married, are not on the same page, like getting your significant other on the same page of parenting. So any tips to how you approach that? Or was he just always on board for something like that?
We met in college. And so we kind of grew up together, became adults together. And I think, I always say like we had a good relationship for a long time, and I guess it sort of just reaches an expiration date is sort of how I feel about it. So there weren't there were some hard feelings when we were going through it, but I think it's remarkable that there are all these skills in terms of being a parent. It takes skill to be a parent. It takes skill to be in a relationship. It takes skill to be a good wife or a good husband. And it's kind of remarkable and I don't even know if it's even possible to get everything right all the time or to be best at being in a relationship and best at being a parent. And I always say like, my daughter's dad is the best dad she could have ever asked for. He is like the best dad in the world. And I think, so what? He's not a husband for me right now. And maybe he wasn't the best husband for me, but that's sort of like, I think what's important is if you can kind of separate out the two and try to park the kind of like the feelings of the relationship and just try and focus on like the positives and like what you want to get out of it. Like, sure, you can fight over every little tiny thing, but like, what's the big picture goal? And like, where are you trying to get to? One of my favorite people to read and also now a friend who lives not very far away from me is Emma Johnson. And she's a writer and author of the book, The Kick-Ass Single Mom. And she's there's a lot of people out there. Another person to follow on Instagram is Single Dad Magic or Michelle Dempsey. Like there are a lot of these people out there who are advocating for amicable co-parenting or there's another one, Happy Divorce is another really great book. And just like choosing the better path. That's not always possible, but I think keeping that big picture in mind and thinking about what you appreciate in the person. And you can absolutely think that they're the best parent in the entire world and not want to be in a relationship with them. Like those are two different things. And I think if you can kind of like separate them out a little bit and think about them with love and kindness in terms of like another parent, as a co-parent, then that's sort of the way forward.
I like that, separating their roles, because Definitely. It's the same thing as like you wouldn't treat your friend and coworker kind of the same at work as you would like outside. So just kind of dividing those. But on that same note of how do you set kind of not necessarily like the rules, but like the boundaries of like, this is how we want to parent. Like some people want to use the more like gentle parenting or positive discipline. And maybe like one parent does not believe in that. How do you guys discuss like anything? Or I think I saw a reel on your thing, like when dad says you can do this or something. And I was laughing because I'm like, that happens when you're married anyway. Like it
Yes.
happens within the house, but you can have
Right.
those conversations because you're living under the same roof and you're like, well, no,
Yeah.
if we're here together, we're a team.
Yes.
How do we approach this? And so how do you get on the same page of like, I don't believe, like, even values, like what you value versus what they value and how you want to raise your daughter together. Have you had those conversations? And if so, how did you bring those up?
So it was funny after I did that reel of like, basically it's like Ezzy, my daughter, is she's, as I was saying, she's just about 5. So she's also figured out that she can say things like, oh, I don't have to do this at daddy's house. Or like daddy doesn't make me do this, or daddy lets me do this. I actually laugh about that because I'm very lucky that her dad and I are very much on the same page. So when she pulls things like that, I'm like, I know. And we talk. So there's not a lot you can do there. But I think you raise a really good point. I think like whether or not you agree on certain pivotal pillars of parenting, almost doesn't matter if you're married or not married, because I have friends who are married and they don't agree with their partner on how to parent, exactly like how to tackle a specific sort of hot topic in parenting, whether that's discipline or whether that's just, all kinds of things, or what school they're going to go to. And that can happen no matter what, whether you're together or not. I think it goes back to really thinking about that relationship you have with your fellow parent as a co-parent, whether or not you're married to them or not, and really thinking about like how you actively want to parent together. And I think I was lucky because parenting it goes back to separating out those two skills, or separating out those two facets of of your relationship with somebody. Like parenting with my ex was never ever a problem. We were always on the same page, and I think I'm really lucky in that respect. And so we continue to always be on the same page because we already were from the beginning. Not on the same page relationship wise, but we were on the same page as parents. And I think if you continue to think about that and think about parenting together, whether or not you're married or not, and think about we say co-parents in divorce, but I think it's really like everybody's co-parenting. You're both making these decisions for your kids. But I think it's like just making sure that you have time to have those conversations, and ideally time to have those conversations when the kid's not around. I think like, and really sort of like carving out time. So if there's something like kindergarten and deciding on a school, then her dad and I will make sure that we set aside time separate from our daughter being there, which is something we can do because she can be with his girlfriend when he's with me and some things like that. So we're lucky in that respect, but just taking the time and, just like you said that about coworkers, and it is almost like running a business, or like, it is almost like a job where you have to almost like set up these like meetings to really talk about what's important to you. And I think in co-parenting, specifically within divorce, it's important to think about what you really care about and what are your true values when it comes to being a parent, and think about that for yourself and then stick to those, but then also know when to pick your battles. So when can you meet in the middle? What is something you can kind of let go too? Because that's just as important, I think.
Well, so you've been in the parenting space for a really long time now as an editor, content producer, things like that. I want to talk a little bit about your pre-mom life and your career journey and how you got to where you are today. It's interesting a lot. I feel like a lot of people pivot into the kid space, like once they have kids, but you've been in it for a while.
Yeah.
And you've, even as a single mom, keep pursuing your career. What are those motivators? And give us a little bit about your journey and your career, because you're at the top here, you're at the top of a company, and as a mom, and that's like, especially post-pandemic. You're the head of a big parenting company post-pandemic. How do you do that? How do you get there?
You're so sweet. I think a lot of this I kind of credit to my own mother, who she's a costume designer in film and television. And she just worked my entire childhood, and she worked hard, and she worked for a career that she was super passionate about, to the extent where I don't think she'll ever retire. She's into her 70s and she's zero, other than the fact that the pandemic's made her have to take a little bit of a back seat, just because who's making movies and TV quite as much anymore? Nobody. But she's like she also thought she's just never going to retire because she loves her job. And so I grew up in that context, and I grew up just seeing my mom working, and it was just like I didn't even know it was a strange, not that it was a strange thing. I didn't even know it was something that was cool to have a real kind of like mom who was top of her career and like pursuing her career and really the breadwinner of the household. It was just what I knew as normal growing up. So I think having that as a context, I knew that I needed to like forge my, career was super important and something that I wanted to prioritize, but also doing something that I loved, that I could be really proud of. So that was always just like something I wanted to achieve. And then I knew coming out of college, I always laugh because coming out of college, I feel like I knew less about what I wanted to do than when I got into college. And that's a good thing, I think. And it's like, I just knew want to write and I want to make money writing. And so that's sort of where I started. And I think building from that and then becoming an editor. And then, I was working in the kind of health and education editing space. And then I was living in London for 10 years, actually. And so I was working over there. And then I got a job back here in the States to come back because it just felt like it was time. And it was working on Natural Health Magazine. But in order to work on Natural Health Magazine, which was bi-monthly, I had to also work on Fit Pregnancy Magazine. I was mostly interested in the natural health element, but I was like, okay, sure. The pregnancy side's interesting too. So that's kind of how I got into the parenting space before I was a parent. And I always laughed working at Fit Pregnancy that I would either like never want to become a parent because I knew too much. or of course I would just want to because I realized like all the kind of joy and benefit of becoming a parent. And the reality was this like mix of like, I think it did make me obviously want to have a kid because I ended up having one. Fit Pregnancy was acquired by Meredith, where I work now, and brought under the Parents umbrella. And so then that's how I moved over to Parents. So I was at Parents when I was pregnant. And yeah, it's funny because when I was with my OBGYN, when I was pregnant, I had like 0 questions. And he was like, don't you have questions? You literally are the quietest patient I've ever had. And I was like, that's because my job is to like create content to answer these questions. And like, that's what I live in every day. So I think, to be honest, I'm
like, good. I know too much. I could probably, I can teach all this and I know more than I even want to know.
More than I want to know. But yeah. And I think like, yes, of course I could do my job before I had Ezzy, and I have plenty of amazing people on my team who are not parents, and it's not a prerequisite. You can absolutely, work as a good journalist, you can work on any beat. That's what I say. But it is definitely now that I've had Ezzy, it makes it a lot easier just using that like gut check of terms of like what content works and what content doesn't work. But I think it can be a blessing and a curse. Like in the one hand, I'm like, oh, I'm a millennial mom. I'm a single mom. I'm living it. My content is my life. My life is my content. But then I also want to recognize that that's my own experience, especially as like a white mom, living here in New York City. I have one experience of parenthood, but I really want to make sure not to lean too heavily on that as like assuming that that's everybody else's experience, because so much of what we want to do is depict a huge broad range of what parenthood looks like in America today. So long story short, but I do think it does make my job more enjoyable for sure, being a parent, mostly because like, especially going through the pandemic, I was very lucky that I could kind of weave in. I even did a video series on YouTube at the beginning of the pandemic about working from home and having my daughter at the same time. And it could become part of my job and part of my brand to talk about it all. But I have plenty of friends who are moms, and, I have a mom group text like probably everybody has, which I think is so important to have, is that mom
Definitely.
Friends.
You have to have that.
You have to have that. And, so many of them talk about like trying to, the anxiety of their kids on Zoom calls and trying to kind of like, their employer's aware that their kids are home, but also just like you don't want it to be too much and all that. And it's like so much of a struggle. And I do feel very blessed because I work on a parenting brand. So it's like,
they get it. Yeah.
They get it, but it's still hard. It's still hard like everybody else.
Well, and with, your career and like where you've ended up, you've had to push through, each level, and you've had to kind of work towards that. Was there ever a point when you had your daughter that you were like, I'm a single parent, you're like, oof, maybe I'm not cut out for this? Or were you like, career is my number one. Family is my number one, but career is equally as important, and I'm going to keep pushing forward.
I said this before, but I think it's like we're having that time as a person outside of being a mom is super important to everybody, I think. But, certainly in my own experience, I think having that time away from being a mom lets me kind of be a better, stronger mom when I'm in it. And I think actually it's funny because maternity leave for me, I had a choice as to whether I'd come back to the States and have a kid, or if I'd stay in the UK and have my kid. And I was like, do I come home where my family is and no maternity leave or very little maternity leave? Or do I stay in the UK where there's like a year of maternity leave and not have any family? And that was definitely something I was weighing up. But, in the UK, because they have such long maternity leave, I had one boss tell me once that he almost didn't hire me because I'd just gotten married and he was worried I was going to have a baby and that would be a whole year out of the office. And I was like, you can't. Oh my God.
That's like a lawsuit.
That's a lawsuit. You can't say things like that. But then it's like, okay, well, but the people are thinking that. That's horrifying.
So what was your decision then?
So my decision was to come back and have my family to lean on, and less, and then eventually that would mean less maternity leave. But to be honest, I find having that village and having that support network so important. And I actually, at the end of my maternity leave, even though it was only 3 months, for a lot of people, that's lucky here in America. And when we need to do better, but I do think everyone's different. And for me, at the end of that 3 months, I was like kind of ready to go back to the office and like embrace that other side to my identity and as a person, and have that career. And I think I did enjoy going to the office and then coming home and parenting, and it has been a little bit of a challenge, I think, for me to have this like big blur of like, even though my daughter's in school, I'm still going to pick her up at 2:45. And so there's going to be like a couple hours where I'm going to do the same old same, which is working and parenting. And, you think about like Virginia Woolf in A Room of One's Own, like it's very hard to do creative work when you're trying to also parent.
Hard to do anything when you're like, and not just parenting, but it's hard to do two tasks at once. Like
exactly,
they say moms are great multitaskers, but really when you
can't multitask.
You can't multitask. It's impossible. Your brain just can't keep switching.
So I think I always liked having that separation of church and state between having that career and holding on to that career and then having that time to parent in the evenings and the weekends. But everybody's different. For me, that was just always something that it recharged me and allowed me to be, I think, a better parent.
You said it's important to take time away from being a mom. What do you do in your time away from being a mom? And and since you were all into the like wellness stuff and things before, when you were working at Fit Pregnancy and the other one, what are some of your wellness practices and what do you do in your time away from being a mom?
Oh yeah. No, it's funny because now that, and a lot of my kind of friends who I mentioned, Instagram friends who I mentioned earlier, Michelle Dempsey's or Emma Johnson or the Single Dad Magic, a lot of us talk about how as a co-parent, you do get kind of like used to having time to yourself. So I feel very able to either, I love yoga. I used to do yoga like every day. That's not the case anymore, but I try and do yoga, or like I really like Apple Fitness just lately because it's like, to me, it feels like doing a gym class at home, and it's actually really been really great. But catching up with friends, going out to eat, all the kind of usual, but also trying to like get away and like, even though we haven't been able to travel, but like try to kind of like get away even like for a night. Last week I went away with my boyfriend actually just for a night away, just to kind of get out of the everyday context of normal. But my friends who are married, they have time by themselves, which is so rare. They'll kind of text me and be like, "What do you do?" And I was like, "Girl, just binge watch. Like, don't stop, nap, binge watch. Like, you don't have to feel like you're doing anything to be recharging." And I think that's really important. Like sometimes because we don't get enough time to ourselves as moms, when we do have it, we're almost so overwhelmed with that time that like we feel like we're not spending it the right way. Like, no, you don't need to be
writing. Then all of a sudden we have mom guilt or like we have our own guilt about like having time. And then we're like, what do we do in it?
Yes. And I was like, literally like binge TV, go nap, like don't overthink it. Do whatever feels right. Go to the movies, whatever, I think just as long as you're taking it, I think but yeah, like, I mean, I had mom friends who would like go and sit in their car during the pandemic because there was no space, or go for that walk. It's whatever it feels right to you, but like, don't feel bad if it doesn't feel like it's enough. Like if it doesn't feel like you're doing like a massive yoga workout, or if you're doing a big like CrossFit thing. No, you can also just binge and sit and relax. Like moms don't get to sit down enough, I don't think.
I actually had a similar question along the lines of what they were asking is because, you are a single mom and so you don't have your daughter the whole time. And so you have that space. Like, do you think that makes it easier or harder to actually pursue the career you're doing? And I don't know if that's like controversial to ask, but I'm kind of curious because you're able to separate that time versus like having your kid at home 24/7.
I think it's probably because I have a real like 9-to-5 type job, although nobody has that. Like, I mean, I definitely like, I'm always on, but I do feel like if I were kind of like doing my own business and building up my own brand from scratch, I could see how it might be easier having those days where, like, for example, when I was recording my podcast, or whenever I'm recording my podcast, I'm able to do that because I have days when I don't have my daughter. I mean, now she's in school, so I have more flexibility, but when she wasn't, it was like I relied on those days when I didn't have my daughter to be able to have a podcast. Like I didn't know if I'd be able to have a podcast on top of my day job if I didn't have that set up. But I think during the whatever normal is, but like during a kind of normal working week, it doesn't really make all that much of a difference, other than the fact that I so appreciate my adult alone time. It's a serious consideration. Like now, I mean, I'm fairly newly into a relationship. Like, so I'm only like 8 months dating my boyfriend. So it's like when you're having those conversations in life about whether you don't want to have another kid, I often think about like if I were to have another kid, then I'd have a full-time kid and I'd be giving up a lot of that time that I have to myself. And I don't know if I really want to do that because it's kind of great. I miss her. I always miss her. But I do I mean, I can go out and like go out to eat and go out and see friends and just do whatever I want for half the time. And there's a lot of statistics we've reported on at parents, and Emma Johnson's done a lot around this, that divorced co-parenting moms who split the time equally with their dads earn more money and do better in their careers because they have that actual like time and space to do that. So I think that there's a lot of evidence to show that if you are in a divorce or if you're co-parenting, fight for that equal time. And it's not always easy because sometimes it feels like as a mom you're giving away time, but I think you're not. You're giving yourself that gift of having time to yourself, which I truly enjoyed.
Think it also gives you structure. So
Yeah.
like when you have a kid 24/7, it's like you try and schedule things but everything's always a revolving door. You never know. But when you know that you're going to have your kid on a certain days and you're not, I feel like you can create more like structure around that time. And so maybe you're just more efficient because you actually can plan. But I don't know.
No, but and you have it. And we talk about the mental load. We did a big thing at parents called Project Mental Unload, talking about the mental load of like why moms are still doing the majority of parenting, even with good dads, like what's happening there. And I think with divorce and co-parenting, like I literally hand out over Ezzy and then I'm not having to do any of the parenting. Of course, like I'm still thinking about all sorts of things to do with parenting, but it's very black and white and I can step away kind of guilt-free. Whereas I always say to my friends who are in marriages, if I can do it, you can do it. Like, why can't you come out with me on Sunday? Oh, I don't know, because I took a Sunday off the other 3 weeks ago. But you can.
Yeah.
Why can't you? Why should co-parenting and divorce be any different? Why can't you take a whole day to yourself? You should. Men, I think our dads are much better at doing that. We cover that a lot in parents. Like dads will do things like, I'm going for a run. Moms will be like, I might go for a run at 2, but I promise it won't be a long time. And like, there are some snacks and it's like that like, can I versus like, I'm going to. So anyway, that's a whole other thing. But I do think there's a lot that just because I'm divorced and have a custody schedule and get half the time to myself, if you're married and there are 2 people parenting, I think it's like letting go of that guilt of taking the time to step away from your kid for a minute and realizing that that actually is beneficial for the kid. I think so. Taking that time to recharge, I think is beneficial, and seeing it as a benefit to the child versus I'm stepping away from my child and I feel bad. I'm missing out on bedtime. If you miss out on one bedtime because it means you're getting your time with some friends to go and have some drinks and recharge, in the grand scheme of things,
It's
I think
healthy.
that that's a healthy thing, and don't feel guilty about it. Yeah, totally.
So I have some personal questions to ask because I'm curious. You said you've been dating for 8 months. So how do you find someone in the middle of COVID to date and as a single parent with a kid? Like, how is dating? I think we're about the same age, I believe.
Yes.
And so I'm just curious, how is that? Because a lot of us moms like talk about like, how is it to date these days? Because we have a couple friends who unfortunately got a divorce during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And I'm curious because
about how dating.
Yeah. How does this all work?
I'm always like, I've always been like, as you can see, like probably can tell from like my career and everything, I'm kind of a go-getter in terms of like, if I've decided I'm going to date, then I like, am like, all right, it's like a job, like I make sure I really did try to like get out there on the dating apps and like really try and date and be mindfully dating and making sure I knew what I was looking for and everything. And, but it was hard, really hard during the pandemic to be dating, but it was an interesting experience too, because so I met my boyfriend back in August, but I dated a little bit during the pandemic before then. And what was happening during the pandemic was a lot more of like what I might call like courting. So like you often would have first dates on Zoom, which was something where I just don't think that should ever go away because like
it's a nice screening process. You don't
screening process. And I don't know if anyone has gone through dating before, it can be a really grueling, and you're often going out and your first date with somebody, you show up and you just know that it's not going to work out, but you still have to sit down and entertain it because you've met at the bar and you have to have the drink together. Well, having the first date on Zoom was like, that's like kind of a game changer because you can really weed out a lot of people you get a lot actually from a Zoom conversation, and you can kind of tell whether or not you even really want to have that second date before you even have to like waste money on drinks or get ready and do all the things that go with going out. But it also means like a lot more like talking, and that talking stage might be longer. And yeah, I think it sort of just came down to like a little bit of like pulling off the Band-Aid and meeting for that. You really do have to kind of meet eventually. And I think now we're coming out of it with vaccines and everything. I think it's probably like a much easier time to be dating. But I think for single people during the pandemic, it was hard. I think for parents in general, it was like a grass is always greener, because I saw my friends who were married and I was so like jealous that they had somebody at home with them. And then they would see me and they'd be like, I'm so jealous that you have all this time to yourself during the pandemic. And I've had none of it. Like I said, I had friends who would go out in their car. So it was a lot of grass is always greener. But in some ways, if you were single during the pandemic, at least for me, it really made me realize like, oh, what matters most when relationships are really important. And so it almost like I had that drive to find a relationship more during the pandemic than I might have before, even though it was like probably much harder to do that.
So did you find him on an app? And I'm curious,
yeah.
what are the hot apps for
Oh gosh. Well, here's my theory on apps is everybody's on all the apps. So honestly, it almost like which app you meet them on. I was always like, I liked Bumble. I was on Hinge. And I mean, I actually met him through Tinder, but I think it's like everyone's on all the apps. So it's like whatever app you're comfortable with, to be honest. But I think that's sort of just how everybody meets anybody these days, more or less. Although there's other places. I know a lot of people are starting to meet people through Clubhouse and like Instagram too. But yeah, definitely through the apps. And that's sort of where I met the other people. I'd had like other relationships since getting divorced. And then pretty much, yeah, all of them I met through various dating apps situation.
Any advice for the single mamas out there that are starting to go out in the dating world now that maybe they're like vaccinated and they're feeling a little more confident, but they've also been like at home and maybe have a kid and are just like, I don't know how to do this. Any advice for them?
For me, I mean, I think it's really important. I think it's a really important side of your life to fulfill. If you want to, not, if you don't want to, you don't want to, don't force it. I think do it if you want to, but don't force it. If you're feeling like I'm not in the mood, then you're not in the mood and you're not ready. It takes work. It takes time and dedication like any other part of your life. But I'd say it's an important aspect of life, not to sweep under the carpet and think just because you're a mom and you're busy, you don't have time for it. If you want it, you should make that time. And it's just as important as anybody, and anyone who's married in a relationship. Like relationships we are humans, we appreciate them and we like it. So in terms of tips, I think why not continue trying to have those first dates on Zoom? I think that's not a bad idea. You can have a FaceTime first if you're not sure, especially if your schedule is all over the place, like parents are. I think there are apps out there. I think it's called Hey Baby. And I don't know where it got to, but it's an app for meeting other single parents. And my boyfriend's not a dad, but I've dated single dads before. And I think there is benefit to well, it's pluses and minuses. If they have a kid, then their custody schedule can make it hard to coordinate your custody schedule, but they're also very understanding of the, custody schedules and things like that.
Did you introduce your boyfriend yet to your daughter?
I did. Yeah, I did. But I was also very kind of slow and cautious to it. And of course, she adores being, hanging out with him and being around him. But I think, the pandemic's definitely slowed things down a little in terms of progressing relationships in general. I think there was a time when his parents had COVID and he had to quarantine, and there was a lot of quarantining and a lot of so a lot of times in our relationship, it felt like we were having a long distance relationship, even though we were, both living in New York City.
At parents.com also, are you seeing stories come out or more trends in kind of the single parenthood or divorcing parents during the pandemic? Have you seen any sort of trends come out of it?
It's an opportunity to get to know somebody through FaceTime and talking to them without necessarily always having that physicality of being with the person. And I don't think that's always necessarily a bad thing. I do think that it's important, obviously, to spend that time together as two people in real life, but there's a lot you can learn and get to know about a person, even if you're not there in person with them. So I think if you feel like your schedule and time is busy, there's a lot you can do with a FaceTiming. There's a lot you can do over Zoom. And in terms of trends, I mean, I think the pandemic has caused a lot of people to kind of face these deep underlying needs and that they have as human beings, and whether or not they're being met, or whether or not they're overstimulated, or what, a lot of times people were in relationships with people, then they barely saw them. But then the pandemic meant they were seeing them all the time. And, it's relationships do well, and maybe it was a relationship that did well because you were both working and doesn't do so well when you're both together all the time. I mean, I think like it's definitely causing people to really kind of like shift their approach or like take a really strong look at their own relationships and think about them and think about what they want and what's been fulfilling for them. I think Clubhouse is a really interesting place if people are on there. I've seen a lot of people having really interesting, intimate conversations about relationships as parents, whether or not people are single or together. So I would recommend joining those rooms on Clubhouse. And certainly you can come to ours that we have on Friday nights. No such thing as weekends. And you can.
Do you host that with Megan, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Megan's going to be, or was on the podcast. Her episode will probably air before this one. So she was fun.
Yeah, she's great. She's my mom. She's my mom bestie. She's one of my moms on on my text group, which is so important.
Oh, well, thank you for sharing all of this information on co-parenting and career and all of that. To wrap it up, I want to ask, what do you think is your mom's superpower? So a superpower you gained once you became a mom that makes you better in either business, life, whatever that might be.
I say like becoming a mom really kind of like made me not afraid to ask for things and kind of just like cut the crap a little and cut to the chase about what I wanted from my life and what I wanted from my career. I think when all of a sudden you have somebody else who's reliant on your job, you working, not only from like a financial point of view, but also from like I'm a role model now to my daughter. So I want to make sure that I'm making the best choices. And I might have been a little bit more hesitant to ask for what I wanted before I had Ezzy, but I think like having a kid just makes me go like, no, like we just need to cut to the chase and ask for things. If you're not happy, ask to change, ask for that pay rise, like ask for that. If you want to change positions, like just kind of go for it. And in some ways it seems like having a kid, you'd be like more risk averse. And I think there is a certain element to that, but I also think that it's like, you're not just doing this for yourself anymore. You're doing it for your kid too. And I'd say that right there is a superpower.
Oh, well, thank you so much for joining today. Where can we find you online?
Sure. So you can follow me on Instagram, Julia Dennison. And same, you can look me up, Julia Dennison on Clubhouse. That tends to be the two places I'm at the most. Or Twitter, I'm at Jules Dennison, Juls Dennison, Dennison. Yep.
Perfect.
And then parents.com.
Yes, parents.com. Well, thank you so much for joining.
Yes. Thanks so much for having me. This has been so great.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Mommy's on a Call. Your support means the absolute world to me. You can find the show notes for this episode and other goodies over at mommysonacall.com. And if you enjoyed this episode or have gotten value from the podcast, I would be so grateful if you could head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave a rating and review so that we can reach and empower more moms all over the world together. Thank you so much again, Mommy Pod, and I will see you here next time.